I trust that you are well and that you are having an amazing day so far. All right, so on today's session, which is high school English, right, we will be discussing writing clear and concise sentences, right? And with part of writing clear and concise sentences, right, it also depends on our writing styles. All right, so we're going to before we start with our lesson, you're going to also click on the aplusstudents.ca. Then you're going to log in with your username as well as your password. We're going to choose language arts. And then we're going to open the grade 9 lesson on, or the chapter on writing clear and concise sentences. All right, so when writing clear and concise sentences, right, there is also different conjunctive adverbs or wording that you need to use in order to also join either your sentences, right, in order for it to flow. So we're going to go into the first lesson, which is transitions with conjunctive adjectives or adverbs, sorry. And conjunctive adverbs are words that connects two sentences, right? Or independent clauses. And it shows the relationship between them. So conjunctive, remember conjunctive means to join. Adverbs, right? In adverbs, usually it tells us about the verbs, right? So conjunctive adverbs are words that connects two sentences or independent clauses, and it shows the relationship between them. Conjunctive adverbs, it can help readers understand how ideas within a piece of writing relates to one another, right? So it is basically joining the two sentences, right? Or connecting the independent clauses to show the relationship between them. That is now when you connect either the sentences or the independent clauses. All right, so conjunctive adverbs, right? It can be, you can either show conjunctive adverbs, you can show and cause the effect, right? So show the cause and effect of conjunctive adverbs, right? Which is like by using words like consequently, therefore, as a result, right? And etc. So if you are writing a sentence, right? Or clauses, for example, and now you want to connect your two sentences, or you want to connect your independent clauses, right? To show the relationship between them. If you want to show the cause and the effect of that two sentences, right? Then you can use words like consequently, therefore, or as a result. So maybe saying as a result of the previous statement, and then you go on and on and on, right? So that will show the relationship between these two sentences or independent clauses. If you want to compare and contrast ideas, right? So if you have two or more ideas and you would like to compare these ideas or contrast these ideas, then you can use words like likewise, however, on the contrary, right? So that is but like a few words that you can use in order to compare or contrast these ideas to also show relationship. If you want to add more information to whatever you already said, right? So you have your sentences, full stop. But now you want to add more information to what you already say, right? Or what you've discussed. Then you can use words like moreover, in addition, furthermore, etc. And words like moreover, in addition, furthermore, right? It is basically words that tells us that you are about to add more information. So it is not something new that you are discussing. It is adding information to what you had already discussed. All right. So if you want to then introduce elaborations, right? You want to expand, you want to explain, elaborate why you are saying what you are saying, why you mentioned that specific sentence, or you stated the what this author or the writer said, right? If you want to introduce elaboration, then you can use words like incidentally, for example, in fact, right? And words like incidentally, for example, or in fact, right? It is words that we use to introduce elaborations. So we are about to elaborate on whatever that we are writing. And when elaborating, you use words like incidentally. For example, right? Because now you had already made mention of whatever you are saying within your sentence. So instead of adding more information and saying moreover, right? But you would like to elaborate on what you had said, then you can use words like incidentally. For example, because if you say for example, we know that it's as if you are giving an example of it, right? Or in fact, because in fact is also a way of you elaborating, right? Or basically just clearing or stating clear facts as to what you are actually telling us. All right, so in order for us to use a conjunctive adverb, right? So when you use a conjunctive adverb, you need to consider how the ideas in the text relate to one another. That is why conjunctive adverbs, we said it must now basically connects to sentences, right? Because it shows the relationship. However, if you use conjunctive adverbs, right, then you need to consider how these ideas within the text relate to one another. You need to know how or what the relationships are that is being suggested by different conjunctive adverbs. So it's not just you having a run on sentence all the time, right? There needs to be a relationship between these two sentences in order for you to want to join these two sentences or to join the independent clauses in order to show the relationship between them. And in order for you to show the relationship between them, you need to consider how the ideas within the text, how it relates to one another. You need to know what relationships are suggested by the different conjunctive adverbs, right? And remember that in a conjunctive adverb, it can help readers to understand how ideas within a piece of writing relates to one another. And that is why they made mention that with conjunctive adverbs, right? Here are a few that you need to look at. If you want to show cause and effect of what you're writing, you can use words like consequently, therefore, as a result. And now you go on and on and on with the sentence. Why? Because you are now showing us the cause of what you're writing, the effects of maybe whatever your piece of writing is about. The effects of alcohol abuse on kids, or the effects that drugs have on minors, right? So that is just an example, or the cause thereof. So you state whatever your reason is. Therefore, the word therefore is not us telling us that you're about to show the cause and effect. So therefore, if mothers consume alcohol during pregnancy, it may affect the health of the unborn baby. Blah, blah, blah. Right? That is just an example. We use words like likewise, however, or on the contrary, if we want to compare ideas or we want to show the contrast between these ideas. And remember, if we want to add more information to whatever we just said, we can then say moreover, in addition, because now you made mention of something, or for example, you made mention that the cause and effects of um, alcohol abuse, right? But now you'd like to add information to whatever you had mentioned. Then you can say moreover, in addition, because now we know you are saying you are adding on, you are saying in addition to what you had just discussed. Furthermore, right, you are adding based on what you had discussed. And whatever you had just discussed, if you want to further elaborate, right, if you want to further explain, you want to expand on what you were saying, then you can use words. Then you can use words like incidentally. For example, you can even use words like in fact. So this is but just a few of the conjunctive adverbs that you can use whenever you are writing, whether you are writing an essay, whether you are writing either an essay about your life, an essay about whichever topic it is, even if it's like a book review, right? Then these are but a few conjunctive adverbs that you can use. Words that shows cause and effect, words that compare and contrast ideas, words that add more information, and words that introduce elaborations. You are expanding on that. All right. And remember to use a conjunctive adverb, right? In order for you to use a conjunctive adverb, you need to consider how the ideas within the text relate to one another. That is why, in order for you to maybe compare and contrast and use these words, for example, like likewise, however, or on the contrary, you need to ask yourself, how are these ideas relating to one another? What are the relationships that are being suggested by the different conjunctive adverbs? Right? Because it is not just about us using fancy words like consequently, therefore, however, likewise, in addition, furthermore, right? We need to know what the relationship is between either sentences or clauses in order for us to make mention of these words, which is the conjunctive adverbs. All right. All right, so if we look at our, yeah, it says complete the text with the better conjunctive adverb. So we are going to read a sentence or the two sentences, right? Then we are going to complete the text with a better conjunctive adverb. And a better conjunctive adverb in order to join the or connect the two sentences, not join, but to connect the two sentences, right? All right, so Mr. Hampton, an avid photographer, feels that it's important to capture the seemingly unremarkable moment or moments of everyday life. So we're going to blank, we're going to put in our correct conjunctive adverb over there, right? So he says, these small incidents that make us who we are might be forgotten. So we need to look at a conjunctive adverb or bitter conjunctive adverb in order to connect those two sentences. All right, so if we now look at, if we're going to reread it and then we will add our correct or our better conjunctive adverb, right? So Mr. Hampton, an avid photographer, feels that it's important to capture the seemingly unremarkable moments of everyday life. So the word that we are going to add within the space over there, the blank space, to show that we are connecting these two sentences are otherwise, right? So otherwise, he says, these small incidents that make us who we are might be forgotten, meaning that he is capturing every moment, right, in his everyday life. And according to him, if he does not capture these moments, right, then these, whether remarkable or unremarkable moments in our life, right, these incidents, it might be forgotten, right? It's the same as like when we make mention of memories, right? So Mr. Hampton wants to capture every moment, otherwise the little moments, the small incidents, the memories, right, it will be all forgotten. But pictures, it lasts basically a lifetime. So otherwise is a word or is the conjunctive adverb that best describes, not best describes that, but best suits or connects the two sentences, right? So otherwise. Alright. Okay, zoologist Diane Fossey. So zoologist that Diane Fossey was an expert on mountain gorillas. So zoologist Diane Fossey was an expert on mountain gorillas. She established a research center in Africa, campaigned against poaching, and wrote a book, Gorillas in the Mist, detailing the story of her work. Blank, the 1988 film based on the book was nominated for several distinguished awards. Right? So we need to choose a better conjunctive adverb in order to connect these two sentences. Right? All right, so we're going to reread it again and then we are going to add our conjunctive adverb. So, zoologist Diane Fossey was an expert on mountain gorillas. She established a research center in Africa, campaigned against poaching, and wrote a book, Gorillas in the Mist, detailing a story of her work. The word that we are going to use is incidentally. So, incidentally is the word that we are going to add over there in order to join or to connect the two sentences. So, incidentally, right, it is her elaborating now. Incidentally, the 1988 film based on the book was nominated for several distinguished awards, right? Which means that the word incidentally, it better connects the idea of the text, right? Because they're saying that she's an expert on mountain gorillas, right? She's got a research center that campaigns against all the poaching, and she even wrote a book about it. So her elaborating more explains that it's more like she is explaining about the good or the great work that she's doing, because the 1988 film based on the book was then nominated for several distinguished awards, which means that they are now giving us an idea that she is doing an excellent job, right? Or excellent campaigning against poaching. So, incidentally, it better connects the idea of the text and the conjunctive adverb, which is incidentally. It shows that the film is an interesting side note about her work, right? Because she has a book about gorillas in the mist, right? Where it details a story of her work. However, the film is also there, right? Which gives us a more interesting side note about the great work that she's doing, which is the zoologist Diane Fossey. So, incidentally, is the conjunctive adverb that we that better connects the idea within the text. In 1859, in 1859, John Wise left Lafayette, Indiana, in a hot air balloon, carrying a bag of mail bound for New York City. After 5 grueling hours, Wise landed a mere 30 miles away in Crawfordsville, Indiana. Blank, because we're going to put our conjunctive adverb in there. The letters eventually arrived in New York by train, right? So in 1859, John Wise left Lafayette, Indiana, in a hot air balloon carrying a bag of mail bound for New York City. After 5 grueling hours, it is like basically elaborating or describing how long, right? 5 grueling. Grueling is exaggerating. It shows the long hours, right? So after 5 grueling hours, Wise, which is John Wise, landed a mere 30 miles away in Crawfordsville. Nonetheless, we're going to choose the word nonetheless. And remember, nonetheless is one word. Even though it looks as if you can have it as 3 words. So nonetheless, right, the letters eventually arrived in New York. So whether he landed 30 miles away from Crawfordsville, right, which basically maybe gives us an idea that it is very far, the letters eventually arrived in New York, right? So whether he landed very far, maybe, he eventually arrived, or the letters eventually arrived by train in New York. So, nonetheless is the conjunctive adverb that better describes the idea or better connects the idea within this text, right? And the conjunctive adverb, which is nonetheless, it shows that delivery, the letter successful delivery by train contrasts, right? It contrasts with the unsuccessful delivery by a hot air balloon. So clearly, they are giving this indication that, firstly, the hot air balloon is quite slower, also, and can also be a bit of unsuccessful in delivering the letters, right? Nonetheless, or however, eventually the letters successfully arrived in New York by train, right? So there is a contrast now between the transportation of the hot air balloon and the delivery of the train, because eventually the letters got to its destination, which is in New York. All right, going to next. Let's go to this one. Some people might assume that space is a pristine and infinite void, right? Blank, it is filled with orbiting garbage. A layer of used rocket boosters, nuts, bolts, camera lens caps, paint particles, and more surrounds Earth. So some people might assume that space is a pristine and infinite void. We need to choose the correct conjunctive adverb. So some people might assume that the space is a pristine or pristine and infinite void, blank. It is filled with orbiting garbage. A layer of used rocket boosters, nuts, bolts, camera lens, caps, paint particles, and more surrounds the Earth, right? So here we are basically seeing almost like a contrast between like how somebody perceives space. However, somebody also saying that it is basically just garbage, right? It is basically just dirt up there, right? So if we were to then show the comparison or the contrast between the ideas, right, then we can then maybe use on the contrary. And it shows or compares or shows the contrast. Contrary. On the contrary. So, on the contrary, so some people might assume that space is a pristine and infinite void. On the contrary, right? It's like saying, however, it is filled with orbiting garbage. A layer of used rocket boosters, nuts, bolts, camera lens caps, paint particles, and more that surrounds Earth, right? Here, the word on the contrary, it shows comparison or it shows the contrast between how people perceive as well as basically space just being orbiting garbage. So, on the contrary, it better connects the ideas of the text or in the text. And this conjunctive adverb, which is on the contrary, it shows that the thought of space as a pristine and infinite void, it contrasts with the fact that space is just filled with orbiting garbage. So, as many people think that, space is the beauty, pristine and infinite, right? But they are actually comparing that it is basically just filled with orbiting garbage. And the word or the conjunctive adverb, which is on the contrary, it either compares or contrasts that two ideas or the ideas. All right. Writer Zora Neale Hurston. So, writer Zora Neale Hurston struggled to achieve success during her lifetime, and when she died in 1960, she was almost unknown. Blank author Alice Walker later rekindled interest in Hurston's work, and now Hurston's novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God, is considered an American classic, right? So we need to choose a, or we need to basically add the, or write the correct or the best conjunctive adverb to show the connection that the sentences have, or to show the idea within the text. So we're going to read it again. Writer Nora Neale Hurston struggled to achieve success during her lifetime, and when she died in 1960, she was almost unknown. Author Alice Walker later rekindled interest in Hurston's work, and now Hurston's novel The Eyes Were Watching God is considered an American classic. We need to look, or we need to choose the best conjunctive adverb, right? The first sentence basically tells us that the writer Zora Neale Hurston, right? It basically shows that, her work was actually going to be unsuccessful. You know, she didn't achieve much during, she was struggling. Now, the next sentence, right? It shows that other than or apart from her struggling, right? Her book was considered an American classic, which means that we are now making a comparison between the two ideas. So if we make a comparison between the two ideas, we can then use however. So writer Nora Neale Hurston struggled to achieve success during her lifetime. And when she died in 1960, she was almost unknown. Almost. However, author Alice Walker later rekindled interest in Hurston's work, and now Hurston's novel, The Eyes Were Watching God, is considered an American classic. So, however, right, it either brings about the comparison or the contrast, right, with the fact that her novel, The Eyes Were Watching God, right, is now one of the best American classics. So, however, it better connects the idea within the sentence. It shows contrast, it compares, right? and it compares that she had a lack of success during a lifetime to now her book or her novel being considered an American classic. All right. So basically, within that lesson that we just did, right? Conjunctive adverbs, when we write a concise either sentence or paragraph, right? If we write a concise sentence, we need to keep in mind our conjunctive adverbs, right? We need to it either needs to show that we are talking about the cause and effects. We are either comparing ideas or contrast. We are about to add more information, or we are about to introduce or elaborate, right? Not just continue, continue, and continue writing. All right. So also when writing concise paragraph or sentences, right, we need to avoid double, illogical, and unclear comparisons, right? So if you make comparisons either between two people, right, or two or more people, and then it needs to be clear, it needs to be logic, right? So avoid double, illogic, and unclear comparison. And an unclear comparison, right? So if you're about to compare either people, ideas, or so on, right? So an unclear comparison, right? It occurs when a comparison has more than one possible interpretation, right? That is unclear. It has more than one interpretation. You are unclear, and we don't know what you are actually writing within your sentences or paragraph. For example, Marco is more annoyed by the noise than his sister. There are two possible interpretations, right? So the sentence Marco is more annoyed by the noise than his sister, right? So the possible interpretations, right, can either be Marco is more annoyed by the noise than his sister is, or Marco is more annoyed by the noise than he is annoyed by his sister. So now we don't know if he is annoyed by the noise than his sister, or we don't even know if he is annoyed by the noise, right, than he is by his sister. So is he annoyed by the noise than his sister, right? Meaning the sister is not much annoyed by the noise than him. Or we're not even sure if Marco is more annoyed by the noise than he is by his sister. So he is actually more annoyed by his sister than the noise. So that is an unclear comparison because now there is more than one possible interpretation about the sentence. Marco is more annoyed by the noise than his sister. Then we have illogical comparison, right? Meaning it is not logic. Illogical comparisons. And illogical comparisons, it occurs in a couple of ways, right? So illogical comparisons, firstly, the comparison compares two things that cannot be compared. So it's as if you are comparing something, however, it's not even supposed to be compared. For example, the average height of the building in New York is much higher than my town. You cannot compare height of a building to a town because it does not make sense, right? You need to compare either buildings, right, with either another height or something of either a house or a factory or something, right? That is comparisons if you want to compare height, for example. The average height of the buildings of New York is much higher than in my town. Either way, it is an illogical comparison, right? Because a comparison that compares two things cannot be compared. You cannot compare, for example, the height of a building to an actual town. Secondly, an illogical comparison, right? The comparison needs the word other or else to make sense. So if the comparison needs words like other or else to make sense, then it is illogic. I think blue is prettier than any color. I think blue is prettier than any color, right? So blue is a color and it cannot be prettier than itself. Or I think blue is prettier than any other color, right? So it is an illogical comparison, right? When the comparison needs the words other or else to make sense. So if you just say, I think blue is prettier than any color, instead of saying any other color, then clearly it is that comparison is not making sense. It's not logical. The third one, if the comparison uses a superlative form instead of a comparative form, or vice versa, right? And remember, we said comparison form, it ends in er, right? Like maybe faster, right? Smarter, and the superlative form, the words end in est, like fastest, longest, right? It's superlative. You basically compare to more than one person or thing, or two or more, right? Whereas comparative, it is just comparing two people or things. So the comparison uses superlative form instead of a comparative form, or vice versa. Of the two of us, Alyssa is fastest, right? Which means that Alyssa cannot be fastest if you're comparing two people. And remember, I said that in our lesson, right? If we are comparing two people, right? And then it's either we say smarter, faster, longer, taller, right? That is comparing two people, places, things, right? But as soon as you are comparing two or more, or you're comparing something to more than one thing, right, then that is superlative, right? It's like, for example, um, Jane is the fastest in her class, which means that she's being compared to like everybody else in the class, or to the girls in the class, or the boys in the class. That is when we use, for example, words like fastest, longest, smartest, and so on. That is a superlative form, not a comparative form, right? So when we write, whether it is sentences or paragraphs, right, we need to avoid double, illogical, and unclear comparisons. If you want to compare either people, you want to compare ideas, you want to compare sentences, right, then you need to do it in a logical way, right? The comparisons needs to be clear. And if it's not clear, then it means that there is possible interpretations that we can interpret this one sentence that you're saying, which means that it is not clear. It is an unclear comparison, right? Your logic or your comparisons, right, is illogical. The comparison compares two things that cannot be compared. The comparison needs words like other or else in order for it to make sense. And you use a different comparison, such as superlative form instead of a comparative form if you want to compare, let's say, for example, to people, places, or things, right? That will make your sentences, your words, or whatever that you're writing illogical or unclear. All right, so that is basically writing clear and concise sentences, and we went over transitions with conjunctive adverbs, right? And with adding conjunctive adverbs, right? Conjunctive adverbs we can either add to show cause and effect, to compare or to contrast ideas, to add information when writing, or to show that we are introducing or elaborating, right? And whenever we are either writing a clear and concise sentence or paragraphs, right, or an essay, right, we need to avoid double, illogical, and unclear comparisons, right? All right, so that is the end of our lesson on writing clear, and concise sentences. Um, I really hope that you had a clear and logical understanding, or more like just a clear understanding about writing clear and concise sentences, right? When to use our adverbs, right? When to compare and when not to compare, right? And remember our sentences, our words, when we add or join or connect sentences or ideas, it needs to be clear, it needs to be logical, right? All right, so I really hope that you enjoyed the lesson. You should have an amazing evening further. Good night.